This is the Working with Warriors podcast by the team at the Regional Men's Health Initiative.
Hello and welcome. My name's Owen Caddo and I'm joined today by fellow team members Terry Melrose and Glenn Duncan. And how are you guys?
Yeah, well, thanks, Owen. Good to be back,
Owen.
mate.
Yep. Listen, we talked in the last podcast about risk-taking and it being normal for males, and this one we just want to talk about risk-taking and our capacity to manage risk, which is made up of many things and many dynamic factors in our life. And what affects our capacity to manage our risk-taking, guys?
Well, knowing ourselves for a start, that's sort of that independent thinking, being able to identify our mates, and they're our real mates. We're not talking about your 500 or 600 Facebook friends. We're talking about those few that you could probably spill your guts to if the wheels are falling off. Finding good mentors is so important. And finding good mentors identifies people who have been through life and managed their risks, because the things with risk-taking is you can remove yourself from being a mentor later on if you haven't managed risk over your life. So good mentors is really important, and looking out for our mates. So it's not just looking out for ourselves. We talked in the last podcast about that friendship group that you surround yourself with. It helps form you. You help form them as well.
And it is all right to call out that bad behaviour, and part of our risk-taking and our growth is doing that. And I see that in some younger people now, and mainly around my younger son's network, that they call out that bad behaviour, which is a good thing.
Yeah, look, and you look at a lot of the media campaigns out there around alcohol. It is a big focus is on pulling your mates up if they're out of control, especially around drink driving. You know, they're taking the keys, and I suppose we saw it too with the One Punch campaign as well, wasn't it? It was blokes pulling up each other, especially around the use of violence. Glenn spoke about lived experience of our mentors being important, but that comes back to an individual basis too. You know, we learn by our experiences. If we've had a close call and close encounter, I think we're a bit more in tune and aware then of potential risks in that area. And we do talk about we become a bit wiser with age, you know. And I was a young fella, used to love getting out in the ocean and going surfing and never thought twice. But as you get a bit older, a bit of that fear sets in, you know. You're always thinking what else could be out there.
You can hear the Jaws music.
Yeah. Having respect not only for ourselves but for others is so important, especially if our risk-taking does involve or put those around us at a higher risk.
Yeah, and just on that respect, but I reckon we talk about that cone of space around your body, which is your space, boy or girl, and you need the permission to get in and get out of it in that space. And part of that is having respect for both the opposite sex, but having respect for your mates around there in terms of fighting, being angry, doing whatever you're doing together. Just respect that space.
Oh, look, and I think road safety is another big one there too. You know, we highlight the importance of you being in control of your vehicle, but it's about respect for the road, the conditions, but also you don't know what the other bugger in the car is going to do too. So it's that cautious and awareness and respect for others as well. Definitely being independent of that peer pressure thinking. And in the last podcast, we spoke about the influence of social media. And I know with some young fellas, you know, putting up videos, you know, it's not only getting out and doing stuff, but who can post the video of doing the craziest thing. And there's a bit of a competition out there, so we got to pull that back a bit. And also drug and alcohol use is a really big impactor. It inhibits our ability to make appropriate and good choices.
It definitely does, Terry. And I guess we should just delve into a little bit, Glenn, of some obvious reasons, but other reasons why people, young and old, use drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, so in the first instance, it could be just to experiment. And sometimes it's to address boredom in people's lives, and it's really important that we identify some of these things because then other measures could be put in place that are much healthier options. Peer pressure is obviously a big one. There are probably signs of that changing over time, just as you were saying before. And habit and addiction can really fire along the use of drugs and alcohol, especially some of the more addictive ones.
Yeah, definitely. No, look, we spoke before about being creatures of habit and addiction and that association with, and we talk about it in our other education, isn't it, that the stresses of like work, worry, you know, that lead to people using some of those harmful habits, smoking. Alcohol is our biggest and most widely used drug of choice, and then obviously recreation drugs. And people do use recreational drugs to get a buzz. You know, it is done sometimes in a peer group, in a circle. There's those pressures involved. But the other side of it is, and I'll talk about some research in a minute, is people are using it to numb and to cope with some pain in their life, to feel good and forget. And the feel good we know is only temporary with drug and alcohol use. And that coping or using it to self-medicate, cope with difficult times in our life. Drugs and alcohol are used as a unhelpful coping method quite often just to deal with stress. And there was some really interesting research on one of the ABC programs, not long back, and they were breaking down some statistics why young people use drugs, and they reckon around 46% use drugs to have some sort of fun. And if we're using drugs for fun, I think we've got to really challenge that. Do we need to have a bit more time exploring our passions, our interests, doing some other things that give us a buzz and get us excited? Because when you break that down, there's some pretty serious consequences.
There is, and that we talk about it, dosomething.com.au, that passions, interest, as you described in that last podcast, Glenn, and what makes us tick and how it describes our holistic health and well-being is just so important from a young age, but it's important to do it later in life. But if we've got passions and interests, we've innately then got some capacity to deal with other shit in our life.
Yeah, definitely. And there are some pretty serious, as I said, consequences, especially around some of those illicit drugs. Half the time, the purity of the substance, what's actually in it, what else is put in there and cut with it. They can have some permanent effects on the heart, on the brain. People who suffer psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, which is the effects on the brain, is permanent. It opens a part of the brain and people go through it and never come back into normal part of reality.
And some of the research around that, Terry, is that it might be in the first hit of a drug that someone's trying, but
you only get one chance.
You get one chance, so it's a really risky behaviour to do some of that stuff.
And those other risks, obviously, young people don't think about the legal implications, the financial aspect. And we know with addiction, and I've spoke to some dads and family members, and that loss of employment, the breakdown of the family circle, loss of trust, and the effect on relationships. So it's ongoing. So that's one side of it. 46% use it for fun. The other half, the 54%, use it for self-medication. We talk about acknowledging we've got pain or issues or some shit in our life. We have to deal with that first. Self-medicating, numbing it isn't going to solve the problem. People's lives can fall apart if they think that's the only way to cope and deal with some pain in their life.
Yeah, right, Terry, and we talk about, blokes going into the cave and self-medicating through drugs, sex and rock and roll, and then self-medication as we get older, perhaps between working harder and talking less, which is a prominent thing we see. But when we're dealing with this form of self-medication, we really have to keep a lookout for our mates and our peers and acknowledge that it's not going to do us any good.
So 2 takeaway points there. If we are using it for fun or to get a buzz, well, we need to explore some other passions and interests and have some time for us. Or if we are using it for that self-medication, we need to get some help and actually deal with the core problem. And look, Owen, as we said, alcohol is our most accepted, it's our most widely used drug of choice. What is it about, I suppose, alcohol and that concept of risk-taking and some of the risks involved with alcohol use, especially in our early formative years?
Yeah, really important that we say we avoid alcohol for use as long as you can, and there's a logical reason for that because the increase risk to teens versus adults is pretty important because our brain is still developing. In that 18 to or up to 25 to 30 years of age and especially that 18 to 20, there's a reason that we shouldn't drink till we're 18, a logical reason, let alone legal reasons. So we have to challenge our mates and our families and everyone about that risk-taking. There's a couple of good ads on TV where the parents have, said no to buying alcohol because they're the biggest buyers of alcohol for underage drinkers, and so that facilitates that risk-taking. But it is all right to say no to your peers, and there's a great example I've heard recently where a young fellow was at a party all night drinking out of a alcoholic can, but he wasn't drinking alcohol. And his peers asked him at the end of the night, like, what do you know? I've been just going topping it up with water and soda, but because he was just looking after himself.
Look, and there is a bit of a change. I think we always, some of our mainstream beers obviously have had non-alcoholic options for a while, but some of your premium craft brewers are bringing up some non-alcoholic options as well, and some of them actually don't taste too bad.
No, and I think the other thing on alcohol, just I'd like to say as well, is that to work out early in your life, if you do choose to drink, when you're over 18, moderation and lowering your limits are really vital that you know. But there is a percentage of the people out there, and I've had a couple of mates growing up with myself, that they just can't drink. So we have
Or
to call,
shouldn't drink, yeah.
or shouldn't,
Yeah,
but can't.
yeah.
No, we have to call them out as a peer, and you know, it's just a really risky behaviour, and to be part of and around those people. So we've got every right to call them out. So work out early in your life whether you can drink or not safely, and give it a miss.
Well, and if you are a drinker, and we joke about, well, it's not really a joke, but there are probably a lot of functioning borderline alcoholics there, and that habitual use does become daily, and there's a lot of research around standard drinks, how many drinks we should have in a sitting, but I think the real challenge there is to have those alcohol-free days. I think that's a really important one. It shows us two things. One, it shows us we're not addicted or relying on it, that we can have a few days off and be fine, and the benefits are both in our brain physiology and also the old put around the belly, mate. It's not going to be as demanding on that.
Demanding, no. So I guess what can we do about drugs and alcohol, like within ourselves and within our peers, and especially in the younger fraternity?
Well, I suppose the difficulty in life is choice, and there's that whole advertising campaign that's currently out that actually has the dad being fronted by his daughter. He says, "Dad, can I have a beer?" And the support that ad, I suppose, shows around him saying no, and the fact that it then takes the pressure off everyone else. If we constantly think that everyone else is saying yes as parents, then it puts us under. There's that peer pressure that we talked about in the last podcast. There's the primary care side to things in that being able to say no is all right. That's also highlighted there. As peers, we can really make a difference. The power of the group, which is probably in the past has been the thing driving some unsafe behaviours, it can equally be the driver of safe behaviours, that primary care of the people around us and those that are drinking to the point of danger.
Yeah, and just elaborating on that, Glenn, you know, that collective approach in football clubs, just for example, and in whatever group you're with, there is a change. I reckon there is a change happening in that we kind of see. There's still a lot of change needs to happen, but that collective and calling people out in your group is happening.
Yeah, didn't we all attended that conference where there was that fantastic point made about a club that somebody had been in that probably had an unhealthy interest with the drinking side of it. He said he realised that his football club, it was actually a drinking club with a football problem. But on the flip side of that, there's some clubs doing some fantastic things, looking at fundraisers that aren't totally centred around alcohol, and also then offering some mid-strength and some light options for people, and clubs trying to take it on, and it's that push from the peer group that's so powerful.
And you can control that risk as well, guys, and we've all got plenty of examples, and in one of your previous lives, Glenn, because we all have a number of lives, but in your rallying days, you know, car rallying days, that is, it's a controlled risk.
Yeah, and as life goes on and you become more aware of the risk, you're much more inclined to. I loved speed, and I suppose it was part of the and that's going fast, not the product, but being involved with it as a family, it was something that I loved doing. But it was always drilled into us that, like with your helmet, $10 head, $10 helmet. So you get the best safety gear, and you could still explore risk, but you could do it in a controlled environment. So in rallying, the roads are closed, there's a roll cage, you've got harnesses, you've got radio points that check that the car's been through, you've got first aid. So there's all these layers of protection cooked into it that make it a really enjoyable and a really safe option of exploring risk. And risk is something that we explore, and it's something that we like, but we need to learn. It's that standing at the top of the hill with the 1 foot on the skateboard analogy. It's important that we spend that time sort of balanced, looking for what could go wrong here and how can I minimise the risk.
Yeah.
And it is all right. I'll just go back to one of the points you made as well, Glenn. It's all right to say no, and we have to, as parents and in community, say no, and age and stage and risk taking. And just to take the driving thing a little bit further is if you take motocross or buying your son a motorbike, and we've been through our process a number of times with our youngest bloke when he was around that adolescent age of 16 to 18, and that's having the right boots
Yeah.
on a motocross, which is really important, and the right helmet, like the $10, but having the right boots, because foot injuries is pretty important. So it is that collective role we can help in helping them take appropriate risks, because we're not going to get away from the risk taking, but it's just about putting it in the right context and making sure it's as safe a place as we can have.
Yeah, and definitely we don't want to be the fun police and stop people from pursuing there, isn't it? Because quite often we take a risk every day, didn't it, with our career choices, our financial situation, but it is having some measures in place. And I suppose you look at some of the stuff around OH&S now is having those controls in place, being aware of what the risk is, and we have controls to negate it. There's always going to be accidents that happen, and that's coming back to some of our key points, being prepared to think for yourself and having that time out away from other influences to think about the consequences. Like Glenn said, having 1 foot on, 1 foot off, and be willing to talk to appropriate people and mentors, and those people in our life have been there before. And we spoke about those couple of key points to surmise our last podcast, mate, but we've got a couple more to follow on from that.
Yeah, look, and they're just really important to make sure that we can enjoy the journey, because like you said, we're all going to take risks, and we have taken risks, and as we get through age and stages, just repeat that we get less. So a 25-year-old to a 45-year-old to a 65-year to an 85-year-old, by the nature of even our testosterone change, we will take less risks, but we're still hardwired for the journey to take risks. So some of those other key points, Terry.
Oh, look, yep, as I said, taking personal responsibility for our own destiny. As we said, accidents will happen. We as young fellas, it's part of life to make mistakes, and the biggest, I think, lesson from making a mistake is how we learn from it. Obviously being responsible for those consequences, but learning from our mistakes and then making more informed decisions as we go forward. And then, we've spoken a number of times about, our passions and interests in life. Channel risk-taking into improving your life, not destroying it. So having some more participation in those controlled environments where we can take risk-taking in a more controlled environment.
Yeah, we need to be holistic about it and have that conversations with our peers, and especially through that adolescent range, which I say is from 18 to 30, but it could be 18 to 40, it could be 18 to 45. So some simple tips really about looking after yourself in this space and our approach to risk-taking. Guys, how can we summarise that?
So, just some simple tips. And it does come back to, we are responsible for our own well-being, no matter what age and stage, and looking after yourself, being comfortable in your own skin is such an important part of that. Being self-aware of how you're feeling. Sometimes we might need time alone, creating those opportunities to explore our passions and interests. We might need some more help and support in certain areas. And it is about having realistic expectations of ourselves. We can't win all the time. We've got to understand our strengths and our weaknesses.
Yeah, I reckon that's really important, just that point, Terry, just to elaborate on that. In life, invariably, we're going to get knocked down. And the challenge is always how we get up again. It's not if we get knocked down, it's when we get knocked down and how many times. And if that's through your risk-taking attitude and profile, well, it is up to you as an individual to grow with that and make sure that you can survive and thrive. And I guess, like you just said, we don't expect to win all the time. That's pretty important.
And on that strengths and weaknesses, another way to look at it is our individual capacity. We're all built differently. We're all hardwired a bit differently. And we do have a different capacity to cope and deal with pressures in life. And as you said, that getting through those difficult times, I've already touched on learning from our mistakes. And once again, like those young fellas I spoke to the other day, we've got to allow ourselves to show a bit of vulnerability. And vulnerability is not about weakness. It's about when things are outside of our control, when we're in the unknown and we need a bit of help and a bit of guidance, and that's okay. And look, there is a lot of help and support out there. Coming back to our Talk to a Mate message, we've got to identify key people in our lives that we can have those difficult conversations with or spill our guts to, and that's a peer, a partner, or a mentor. So who's in your circle? Who's in your corner to help you through those challenging lifetimes? or sometimes we might need to look outside of that, and there is a lot of professional support out there, whether it's a school chaplain, our footy coach. There are some specific helplines out there, especially around drug and alcohol. There is a state drug and alcohol support line that's funded through the Mental Health Commission. You know, we always promote Men's Line. It's a good starting point to talk about some of those difficult points in our life. Men's Line Australia, 1300 789 978. And look, if we have been impacted by accidents or some grief, there is the Road Trauma Support WA, which is operated by Injury Matters. And grief is one of those things we need to talk about and acknowledge the different stages we can go through. And there is also a grief support line out there as well. Yeah, so reaching out, having a chat, and look, guys, I suppose that getting in touch with our identity, we've got a whole series of podcasts that touch on a lot of those issues in life that we need to be aware of.
We have, Terry, and yeah, just to finish off on that, the little skateboard guy on the hill with 1 foot off, 1 foot on, hopefully we can just get us all to that position so that we can have a think about how it's going to end up, which in effect is thinking about our risk-taking, and we are risk-takers, so it's about managing it and not shying away from the fact. So, no, take care, guys. Take care in podcast land, and we'll catch you with the next podcast.
No worries. Thanks, Owen.
Good on you, Alan. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to a mate, just let him know you're there. Talk to me, mate. Oh yeah.
Thank you for listening to our Working with Warriors podcast series.